Okay, brilliant. Hi, hello. So welcome to MEWSo's second virtual event. This one's a very different tune to our 10-year anniversary that we had earlier in March. So the Middle Eastern Women's Society organization has been working with migrant women for 10 years, helping them to rebuild their lives in London. And we've seen firsthand how migrant women are more likely to fall into dangerous and abusive situations. And with the growing intolerance towards migrants in general in our society, we believe that it's important to have this discussion today. So the date today is the 30th of October, and we're holding this conference called Violence, Slavery and Deportation, the Plight of Migrant Women in the UK on Zoom, which is currently being streamed on YouTube, where it'll be uploaded onto the MEWSo YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rose Fadarazi. I'm the Project and Service Coordinator at MEWSo, and I will be the moderator for this event this evening, along with my clients who are my colleagues who are here, Audrey, who is doing admin, and I thank you in advance for how crazy it's going to get behind the scenes. So on behalf of MEWSo, I would like to thank you all for attending. I have a few housekeeping rules just to keep things running smoothly. Please, can you make sure that your microphone is muted at all times, especially for audience members. If you have a question for our panelists or would like to contribute to the discussion, please use the chat function on Zoom to do so. And if you're watching us on YouTube Live, I have eyes on the comment section, so please feel free to ask any questions. And if there's time for a question and answer portion, then your question may be selected. But for our Zoom audience members, if your question is selected, then you may unmute your microphone once I call upon you to speak. I would like to remind you all that this session is being recorded and put up on YouTube, so please feel free to turn off your microphone or your camera, sorry, if you're uncomfortable, and just listen to the discussions. This is scheduled to be a 3-hour event. However, one of the many benefits of Zoom is that you're welcome to arrive, leave, or return at any point. We only ask that you do so silently so as not to disrupt the conversation at hand. So if I haven't already, I'd like to take this time and apologize in advance if there are any disruptions or technical issues during the course of the 3 hours. We're trying our best to keep things sailing smoothly, but errors can happen. I can only thank you for your patience if we run into any issues at any point. So before we start, our founder and executive director, Halala Tahiri, would like to say a few words, and then we'll move on to our first panel. So Halala, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rose. Hello, everyone. And I really appreciated that you attend this conference, and very welcome. As we are living through very hard times with many disasters and conflicts around us, I'd like to take this moment to show my respect and give my condolences to the friends and families of those brutally murdered in France recently, attacked by Islamic fundamentalist terrorist groups. People in Europe fought for more than 150 years for freedom of speech, for freedom of expression, and it must be protected. It's a fundamental human rights. Now back to the conference. Around us, there are many campaigns and organizations, individuals and activists working with refugee and migrant. I hope in this gathering we can address specific issue on migrant women and refugees and their issue and their situation, and share ways in which we can help protect them from further injustice and abuse. Stay with us. Thank you.
Brilliant. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you for joining us this evening. If I could please ask our speakers again to mute their microphones and to use the Zoom effects if you'd like to raise your hand at any point if you wish to speak, refute, or comment on a point that has been made. So the first panel's topic is the portrayal of the migrant crisis in media and society, and I will go around introducing you individually, where you'll be given 5 minutes to present your views on the topic at hand. And afterwards, we'll watch testimonies from 2 migrant women relating their experiences moving to the UK. And once we've watched both videos, our panelists will be asked to give their initial thoughts before delving into the prearranged questions. So our 3 panelists for this are Zrinka Bralo, Halale Tahiri, and we were due to have Emily Thornberry speak today, but unfortunately at the last minute she had to pull out. So it will just be between Zrinka Bralo and Halale Tahiri today. So could I please invite Zrinka Bralo, CEO of Migrants Organised, to just speak for 5 minutes on your views on the topic, just broadly.
Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me. This is always a very important topic, but now it seems even more important because we're reaching a point in the way refugees and migrants are portrayed with a hostility reflected in policy that is openly called hostile environment. And it would take a long time for me to bring out all the evidence as to how we got to this point in terms of how public narrative has been created around refugees and migrants, what language that's been used and how it contributed to this almost hysterical need to protect the borders and the way people are portrayed. I'm a refugee. I came to this country 27 years ago from the war in Bosnia, and I'm also a journalist, so this, or at least a recovering journalist now. And my frustrations with the discourse started when I saw how international news media portray the war in Bosnia, fleeing, and that connection is very rarely made. So then people coming from countries where they're being persecuted or countries where there is a war are called migrants. And that's the least of our problems. I have looked into the research into this area when I first arrived, as I was a journalist and I was a student studying media. And I looked at the discourse analysis for my thesis of portrayal of refugees. And in a period of 3 months in 1996, I found 90 articles about refugees and migrants. And I bet you if we were to Google it now, there would be like 300,000 articles. But in this noise and shouting, we very rarely get the full picture. We very rarely get a full context. And we also do not get to understand stories of people. And that leads to this populist narrative around numbers, around good and bad migrant on one hand, or this kind of blob of suffering where we can't really understand what's happening, but we don't think this is our problem. And then there's a further problem of not understanding of hardship that people experience when they arrive into what's considered to be a safe country. And in this country in particular, policy called hostile environment. And women within that are even further dehumanized. So we don't understand the reasons why people are fleeing. So it becomes very difficult in conversations with friends and family, let alone in public discourse, to disentangle ourselves from this false impression about huge numbers of people coming and their multiple needs. Or we get trapped and drawn into this conversation that is about contributions of good immigrants. Now, we don't really have power. We don't own media as campaigners, but we can and must put our own content out there, and we can and must organize. So one of the things that we've done at Migrants Organize is that it's really difficult for us to, even when we're invited into mainstream media to speak, we're framed within this kind of voiceless discourse. So yes, of course we would say that and we would complain. So we started organizing, and over the last 2 years we came up with a list of 35 demands as to what would a better, just, fair, decent system look like. And we pull that together into something that we call Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter. And we just organized 25 actions in the pandemic up and down the country under the banner Solidarity Knows No Borders. And I just want to highlight two demands that we put in from the charter. There's a whole host of demands around hostile environment, but we also included these two. One is that we demand an end to the culture of disbelief and all forms of discrimination based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, membership of social group, and migration status or country of origin, because this is now becoming a serious grounds for discrimination in our public services. And the other demand that is pertinent for this discussion today is that we demand an independent media oversight, including a regulatory body with the ability to act against fake news and hate speech towards migrants, refugees, and Black and ethnic minority communities. And we think that part of the problem is that for many years we had absolutely no means of redress or correcting stereotyping and just pure lies that are published about migrants and refugees in this country. So I will end on that note, and I will end on my favorite quote, which I think it's also important to remember, that we, refugees and migrants, and refugees in particular, and women, we're not just the sum of our suffering, but we are resilient survivors. And I want to end on Arundhati Roy's quote, which says that there's really no such thing as voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced and preferably unheard. And I call upon all of us here today to work together in solidarity to build our power in order to shift this position that we find ourselves in. It's probably going to be a long struggle beyond this pandemic over the next 4 years of this government, but we have nothing to lose apart from trying and doing our best. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your inspiring words. Halala Tahiri, please take to the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. It looks like that still people are waiting in the room, and I'm also busy with inviting people. Well, thank you so much, Strinka. I really appreciate it, and I'm really proud that around us there is so many activists, men. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mute. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Strinka. I really appreciate it, and I look forward that the rest of the group exactly we will be in the same boat to support migrant and refugee women. When I was 17, I had to leave my home because of Iranian Revolution in 1979. I spent the next 42 years, the best years of my life, traveling across 5 countries and 2 continents, searching for peace, protection, and a better life. In that time, I witnessed 2 revolutions, civil wars in Iraq and Kurdistan, lost beloved people in my family, and many dangerous people during this period that it was. But I also found many kindness, friendship, and people who helped me. But whenever I moved, I was also able to make friends who become like my family. I fought shoulder to shoulder with them for justice before being forced to move on again. I know what pain it is to live in exile, being treated like a second-class citizen, facing unkind looks, and feeling unwelcome. But I also found kindness, friendship, and support. And finally, I got the opportunity to settle down and thrive. And I am happy for that. That's my story. I was a migrant in the 19th, but let me try and explain what I think migrant women are facing today here in the UK. The most recent big recession made class divisions between people even bigger, increasing the gap between rich and poor and increasing the depths of poverty. COVID-19 has had a massive impact on the lives of the poor and BMA communities, with more restriction in NHS services and benefits support. In the last 40, 50 years, we have witnessed the rise of religious fundamentalists and international terrorism that has seen the erosion of human rights all over the world and attacked freedom and democracy. In all of this, one of the most vulnerable groups is migrant women and children, especially those from cultures where the men in the family decided to pack up the family and transport them. The women have no choice. Similarly, migrant women who are single or travel single, who leave their homes to escape terror and violence from their family or community, are extremely brave to take the risk. But they escape one hell only to get trapped in another. They leave a violent country by whatever means possible and are then forced to live with violent perpetrators because they have nowhere else to go. If they find the courage to seek help for protection, they fear being deported. Fear of deportation makes thousands of women stay in violent relationships years after year. Some are killed, and many suffer severe mental health problems. This is happening in the UK here and now. There is an ocean of women sleeping on tear-soaked pillows every night. In the face of such misfortune and poverty in society, it's easy for states and their media to blame increasing poverty and job losses on refugee and migrants. It's always easy to blame outsiders, but it's an excuse to cover up the cuts in basic support to everyone who needs it, migrant or not. The reality is there are enough resources to help all Britain's citizens. It's just the successive governments choose to protect and benefit the rich and spread the lie of the trickle-down effect. Nothing trickles down to the poor. Everything has to be fought for. Look around the world at campaigns about climate change, human rights, workers' protests, and Black Lives Matter. Millions of people protesting against police violence. Empty promises and inaction from their governments. People are fed up, they are tired, hungry, and have no peace. Some media report on the horrifying lives of migrant people who are only searching for a better life. But most of media ignore it and poison the debate with hate and misinformation, blaming migrants and refugees for all of society's illness, rather than challenging the tried and tested strategy of the powerful to divide and conquer. In the context of this condition, xenophobia, fascism, and racism are rising among our society, punishing and abusing the rest of people. If you get the poor squabbling among themselves, the hope is that they won't notice that what government up to in squeezing services and benefits, or that some police are getting away with murder, or that many rich people don't pay their taxes, or that the greed of corporations is protected over and above the needs of poor, or that the environment is being plundered over and above the needs of everyone. Migrant people, especially the women and children, are often victims of war. They have lost everything. Their past and present and their futures are highly uncertain. What they need is help and kindness and protection from harm. Many of us are using our violence to do exactly that, protect them. And I want this conference to examine ways we can keep up the pressure to make governments listen. The purpose of this conference is to raise awareness regarding the plight of migrant women. Here and now, the first thing must be to protect migrant women living with perpetrators who are threatening them, abusing them, forcing them into domestic and sexual slavery, and threatening their life. Migrant women must not be threatened with deportation by the state just for wanting to be safe. They should have the full protection of the law. That's everybody's basic human right. I look forward to hearing our upcoming speakers address these issues and to share ways in which we can help protect these women from further injustice and abuse. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you very much for your brilliant words. I will now be sharing two recordings. The first is a 5-minute voice clip from a client relaying her experiences moving to the UK from an abusive situation in France, and she relates the difficulties of integrating into UK culture when living with an abusive and controlling partner. And the second is a 12-minute interview between myself and a client of ours, Amina Mohammadi, who tells the story of her life moving from Iranian Kurdistan to the UK after experiencing years of emotional abuse at the hands of her family and ex-husband before converting to Christianity. In Iran, for those who don't know, it is against the law to convert to any religion from Islam, and so she was forced to leave and is currently claiming asylum in the UK. The purpose of these videos is I would like to ask the panelists to make notes of how these stories relate to what you've just shared with us, how they make you feel, what initial points you can draw from these stories, and how it fits into the overall narrative of the migrant crisis. Just a trigger warning as well that there is mention of emotional abuse, depression, and suicidal thoughts in these testimonies.
I am a mother of one child. I suffered domestic violence from my husband. Before the domestic violence started in France, because I lived there. I lived with his family. He and his mom took all my money because I worked before my marriage. Her mom forced me to clean, hard worker, to cook and to bake every day cakes for her friends who received them in her house. I paid all tickets for them. I paid bills. I couldn't use the hot water. I could take shower just once weekly. I cannot use water. In the winter, I wash the dishes with the cold water. And she took all my money. I paid electricity, wash machine. And when I had my baby, my son, I cannot use washing machine. I washed all clothes with my hand, and I have not good health. I suffered with many problems of my health. My husband couldn't sleep with me. He can join me when his mom slept. Also, my husband returned to work in France. And when my son was born, my mom-in-law refused to receive me in her house. I suffered with my son and my health. I was going in many hostels in France, and I can't take care to my son. And I was returned to my mom-in-law. I suffered again. I cannot forget this. I slept in my car because my husband insulted me and asked me all time, give me money. Finally, my husband decided to give me leave in UK and apologized and asked me our life will be changed when we go with me in UK. But no, he refused to give me the money. I cannot go out. And when I asked him to give me just money to anything for me or my son, refused it. I had a big problem with my husband because my husband stayed all time with the internet, with the Facebook, didn't give me important for my son and for me, and didn't give me the money, didn't let me go to look, for example, to find any friend. And here, when I left his flat, I was going out without anything. I didn't find my place here because I'm feeling alone with no family here, no friend, and he cannot look to his child, cannot play with him. He forgets me and forgets his child. I suffered again a lot of in London, and one day my son was going in the school, cried, picture of his dad to scream me and to hurt me. His teacher go to the head teacher. The head teacher called me emergency, and I was going, and I started to cry, and she called the police, and the police was coming, and this day I separate of my husband, and the police gave me the name of your charity, Middle Eastern Women and Society Organization. I found a big help of this charity. And last time, Sudabi, I had any benefits and told me can help me with the financially problem. Now it's good. I sleep good. And now I do many things with this charity. I study every Thursday online with English conversation. I learn, I change, and now I want to tell and women had domestic violence, and if I can help any woman to resolve her problem, don't accept the abuse of their husband. This is not good. And you need to improve, to speak well, to change, to go out, to discover important places in this good country. Thank you so much. If you need help, you contact this charity.
Thank you for joining us. My first question is
I want to tell
دوای که دانشگاهم تاڵ کرد هاتمە بۆ شارەکەی خۆم ئەلا ڕەغمە مەیلی باسنی خۆم قبولم کرد کە ئێزدواج بکەم حەزمە کرد هەرچێ زووترە لەو خانەوادەی لە خۆم حەزمە کرد بچمە ناو زندگیە کە بتوانم ئازاد بم بتوانم ئەو لەو سەختگیریانی خانەوادەم ئازاد بم توام زندگیە خۆش بۆ خۆم دروستکەم کە متاسفانە ئیشتباهێکم کرد کە لە چایەک بە چایە ترکەوتم نەمزانی کە ئێزدواج باعث ناکە من خۆشبەخت بم شروع من ازدواجم کرد ساڵهای ئەوەڵی زندگیم کە بە زۆر بەسەختی گوزارا من ئاشنایەکم تەکەوە یەک نەفەران نەبوو کە چوومە ژێر سەختە بێ کۆبووین زندگیمان کرد مدەتا زانیم کە ئاعتیادی هەیە ئینسانێکی معتادە شوەکەم ئاعتیادی شەدیدی بوو ئینسانێکی ئەلکولی بوو دوای مدەتا کە زانیم دووبارە کە ئەمە ئەنجامات دەرحاڵەکە خەریکی ڕابەتی نامەشرۆ تەکژنانی ترا بوو تەکژنانەکە ئەوانش ئاعتیادیان بوو ئەچوو بە ماڵیان ولی ئیتر مدەتێکە بەوانە سەرم کە هەوتم خاستەوێت عاقڵەوێت ئەتوانێت دێتە سەر زندگی ڕەواڵی عادی خۆی مشاکەم هیچ خراوتر وتم مناڵێکم بێت شاید عاقڵ بوو هات سەر زندگی دەرحاڵێکە مناڵەکە هات هیچ زندگیەکەم خاست بوو هیچ خراوتریش بوو هیچێک ئیجازە نادا ئەو شتانە کە خۆم دڵم پێوە بوو باقی دانیشگاکەم ئێدامە دەم چون ئەوەڵ وتم من دانیشگام هەرەکەمە بم بۆ هیچ کوێ بچم تەک خانەوادەما زۆر ڕابەتەم بێت ئەسڵ هیچ کوێ محدودی کردمەوە ئەکسەرە من هەمیشە لە ماڵەوە بووم دەرحاڵی کە ئەم شارایەتەم هەر قبول کەوتم بە خاتری مناڵەکەم گوناحە حەز ناکەم لەژێر دەستی باوکێکی ئاوا معتادە گەورە بێت هەر تەحەممڵم کرد هەموو سەختیەکی نەداری بە هەموو شتێکی سازانم ولی ئیتر واقعاً بە نەتیجێ یعنی وای لێ کردم کە زەدەی کردم لە زندگی حتا باعث بوو فکری خۆدکۆشی مەکردم متاسفانە تەنها بووم لە پشتم نەبوو بەخاتری ئابڕووی خۆم بەخاتری مناڵەکەم وتم با هەر قبول یەکەم هەرچیە بێت ئەم زندگیە بهێنمە سەرەوە ولی تر واقعاً تر دوای مدەتێوتی باشە تەلاق بسێن ولی تر دادگا حەقیاندا بە پیاوەکە چونوتیان تەلاق بە پیاوە ژن هیچ مەسئولێتێکی ئەم هینانەی نییە دنیا بۆ من ئیتر بوو بە زیندانێکی چکۆلم بۆ خۆم دروست کردبوو ئیتر محدودیەتهای خانەوادە بەلایەک قسەی خەڵک بەلایە بێو کە پشتوانەیەکم بێت هیچ پشتوانەیە لە پشتمان نەبوو نە حکوومەت مەسەڵەن بۆ عنوانێکی ژنی من تەنهام هیچ کەس حمایەتی لە من نەکرد واقعاً زۆر سەختیان لێگرتم نان هەش بچم بۆ دانیشگاکەم ئیدامە باقی دەرسەکەم بخوێن و حەزمە کرد واقعاً بڕۆمە باقی ئیدامەی تەحسیڵ بم بتوانم لەسەر پای خۆم بم دەستم لە گیفانی خۆما بێت متکی بە هیچ کەس نەبم کە لەم سەختیانە بووم دوای مدەتها ساڵها تەکرفێکێکمە دووبارە ئاشنا بوومەوە کە لە دانیشگا بێ کۆبووین دووبارە چاوم پیکەوت ڕافتەوامەدمان شروع کرد بێ کۆ یعنی توانیم تەکەوە زۆر ڕاحەت بووم دەردە دڵکەم شتایەکی پێ من بە منی وت ڕاهنمایی هەیەکی کردم زۆر بەدڵم نیشت منیش عەلاقم پەیە کرد کە مەسەبی ئەوەز کرده بوو یعنی دینەکەی ئەوەز کرده بوو لە ئیسلام هات بۆ سەر دینی مەسیحیەت بۆ منی ئاشنا کرد منی بەو دینە ئاشنا کرد زۆر بۆم خۆش بوو یعنی ئومیدێکم بە زندگی گرت لێم سەندۆ دوای مدەتێک کە پیان زانیم کە من تغییر مەسەبم داوە دینم داد باعث بوو کە بێەوە بە دەلایلی ناخواستە من مناڵەکەمم بەجێ هێشت لە ترسی گیانی خۆم بە خاترێک و تەهدیدی باوکم بوو خانەوادەم بوو کە جامعە بریش زانیای ئەوە لە دوو تەرەفۆ من تهدید کرام مەجبور بووم لە ئێران خارج بووم یەک نەفەر معرفیان کردم کە منی لە ئێران خارج کرد ئیتر من ڕێگاکان جوان نازانم لە چ شارهایەک و هاتمە دەرۆ لە ئێران چون هەر ئەکسەرەن شەوانە منیانە برد قاچاغبەرەکە چەند ساعەتێ ماشین منیان برد تەنها خۆم نەبووم چەند نەفەری تریشم تەکا بوو ئێمەیان برد بۆ دێهاتێ ئەکسەرەن شەوانە ئەم کارێشیانەکە بە ڕۆژان نا منیان برد بۆ دێهاتێ چەند ڕۆژێ لەوێ بووم و دوایەوە لە مەرزی ئێران خارجیان کردین ئەزانم کە بردمیان بۆ تورکیا چون تورکی قسەیانە کرد بە لەهجەکەیان ئەمزانی کایرە تورکت دەبانن احتماڵی هەیە تورکیە بێت هەفتەیە لەسەر ئاوا بووم بە کەشتیەکی 13 متری 70 نەفەر ئینسانی تیا بووم تەنها ژنی مجەڕەدی نا ئەو کەشتیە من بووم پڕ بوو لە ئینسان کورد و عەرەب و ئەفغانی و سووری و هەموو نەوع ئینسانێکی تیا بوو زۆر بووین 70 نەفەر کەم نەبووین حتا ژنی حاملە مناڵ 1 ساڵە مناڵ چکۆلەتریان مناڵێکی 1 ساڵە بوو کە پیرترینیشان 70 ساڵی بوو زۆر بە سەختی ئەم 1 هەفتە هاتین لە ئاخرۆ چەند ڕۆژی ئاخر ئێمە بێ غەزا ماین بێ ئاو ماین لە ئاوی دەریا ئەمان خوارد یعنی غەزا نەمابوو کە بیخۆین بێەوە کەمسا حەمام و دەستشویشتە کەسم شتای بەهداشتی ئەسڵەن نەبوو زۆر سەخت بوو زۆر بێژم چەند سەختیمان کێشا جێگایکی تەنگ گشتی ئاوا خەوت یعنی ئاوا خەوتین شەوانە ئاوا یعنی بەدەنمان وشک بوو بۆ 1 هەفتە مثال لە کەشتێکیش داوەزین ئاوامان لێ هات هەر ئاوا ئەحساس مەکەن لە ناو بێشکەی ئاوا بێشکە ئەو ڕژێنێت ئاوامان لێ هات ئێتە کە گەیشتینە ئیتالیا ئەسەر ئەنگشت و شتیان لێگرتین ئەوش لە ئاخرۆ منزانیم ئیتالیایە نەمەزانی بە زوان و شتەکەیان هیچ حاڵی نابووم چیانەوەت زانیمان کە ئەوێ ئیتالیایە ئەسەر ئەنگشت و شتیان لێگرتین و دەتێکش لە ئیتالیا قەرەنتینەیان کردی متری ئەم کۆڕۆنا لەبێ بووین زۆر ئسترسێکی زۆر سەختم بێ و چون خۆم تەنها بووم وانە بوو کە کەسێکم تەکابێت بێژم یەک نەفەر لاقل دفاعێکم لێ بکات لەنا ئەم گشتە پیاوە هیچ کەسم تەکانە بوو فقط خۆم هەر خۆم بووم دوای مدەتێک برمیانم بۆ جەنگەڵ لە جەنگەڵەوە بووین 5-6 ڕۆژێ لە جەنگەڵا بووین 4-5 بۆ یاک 5-6 ڕۆژ جوان دەقیق نازانم لە جەنگەڵا زندگیمان کرد کە ئەوەش سەختی هایەکی خۆی بوو جەنگەڵ ناو چادرێکە بێو کە حەمامێ دەشوێش ئەسڵن ئەوانەیە هەر ئیمکاناتی بەهداشتی هەر نەبوو ئەوە ئسترسم پێوارد بوو یعنی 2 دەفعە من عادەتی ژنانە بووم لەو مدەتا 2 دەفعە ئەونا ئەترسام لەناوخوا ئەم گشتە پیاوە من لەناو ئەم جەمعە پیاوانە بەڵایەکم بەسەرانەیەت وەلی ئیتر ئیقامەت و استقامەتی خۆم یعنی ئەو توانیم کە واقعاً ئەو جەمعە سەربەرز بێمە دەرەوە تاحقیقای زۆر سەختی خۆی بوو نەخۆش کەوتم لە ڕێگا حتا بێهۆش کەوتم من لەناو ڕێگا ئەو نەخ پیادەڕەویم کردبوو بێهۆش کەوتم هیچ کەسم ناناستی ئەو نە سەخت بوو بۆم ینی چون تایسە من ئەو نە پیادەڕەویم نەکردبوو ئەوە نەخۆش کەوتم ینی بەخاتری من چەند سەعات ئەم گروهە وێسان بەخاتری من وێسان کە من تۆزە بێمە سەر حاڵ پیادەڕەویمان کرد کە گەیشتین بە ساحلێ وتیانی تر مەسیری فەڕەنسا بە ئینگلیسامە ئێمە لەم دەریاوە ڕەدبین شەوێکیان کە شەو بوو چون ساعتەکەی دەقیق نازانیم شەو بوو گەیشتینە قایقی بادیان هێنا چەند نەفەر بوون حدودەن 20 نەفەرێکە بووین قاچاغبەر بوو خانەوادە بوون هاتن قایقەکەیان با کرد لە ناو ساحلەکە دوای پیادەڕەویەکی زۆر گەیشتینە ئەو ساحلە قایقەکەیان با کرد و ئەو جوان بیرم دێت کە ئەو قایقە کون بوو بە چەسبی ئاویان هێنا چەسبێکیان لێدا و شتێکینا بەسەریا و قسییانە ناو ئاوەکە جلیسقەیشم پێ نەبوو من فکری لێ ئەکەمەوە ئەلانیش فکری لێ ئەکەمەوە کە من چ جورئەتێکم بووە بێدونێکۆ جلیسقەیەکم پێبێت ئەو مۆجیت ئەخە و مۆجانە وا ئەیاندا لەو کەشتیە ئیتە ئەوە هەڵگەڕایەتینەوەی تێما کەوتینە ژێر ئاو مەرگی من حتمی بوو وەلی ئیتە واقعا ڕیسکم کرد هەلیکۆپتەرێک لەو سەرەوە تمشایە کردین و دوای مدەتە قایقێکی گەورەی کەشتێکی گەورە هات پۆلیس بوو ئێمەیان گرت سواری ئەو کەشتیان کردین قایقەکەشیان بە دوای خۆیان ڕاکێشا و فرمانیان بۆ شارێتتر کە پیان وتن دۆڤێر کە دوای زانیمان کەوێ دۆڤێرە لەوێ وەسایلە شتەکان گشتی کەلی باسمان کولەن تەڕ بوو لەوێ سوال و شتیان لێ کردین و وەسایلەکانیان لێ سەندم سوال و جوایان لێ کردین پۆلیس هات لەکۆ هاتی سوال شتیان لێ کردین ئەسەر ئەنگشتیان لێ گرتین و یەک ڕۆژ لەوێ بوون شەوەکەیشی هەر لەوێ بووین دوایەوە ماتێل بۆ لەندەن.
The next question is, did you feel welcome here when you arrived? Was there anyone there to help you get settled?
احترامم لەم کشوەرە دی احترام چەنێ واقعاً بە کشوەر لەم کشوەرە احترامم دی هەمچگای خۆشم تعجب مەکرد چەنێ خاستێکمانە ڕەفتارەکە یعنی ئەرزشم بۆ قایلن کە مەسەڵەن من نەخۆشەکەم بێژم نەخۆشم چەنێ بە دۆرما دێن دکتۆریان بۆ گرتم چەنێ بە دۆرما هاتن واقعاً احترام ئەرزشم لێرە دی کە واقعاً منیش ئایسە خۆم ئەحساسەکەم چەنێ ئەرزشم هەیە لای خۆمان ئەمچین شتێکم نەدیە چون هەمیشە ژنیان تەحقیر کردە ئەسڵ حەمایەتی ناکەن قسەیەکەکان سن بودونە بودی ئەو قسەی ئەو ژنم مهم نییە وەلی لێرە کوچێکترن شتێژی زۆر بە ئیستقباڵەوە دێم جواب دەدەنەوە بە احترام ئەنی مهمترین شتەوەی احترامت بۆ قایلن بە عنوانێکی یەک ژن من واقعاً ئایستا ئەزانم کە ئەرزشم هەیە وەلی متاسفانە لای خۆمان هەمچین شتێکم نەدیە ئەسڵ ژن ئەرزشی نییە.
And what are your hopes now that you're in London?
وەلی ئایسە کە دووری مناڵەکەم کە بۆم زۆر سەختە تەنها ئومیدی من یەکدانە مناڵم هەیە کەوش لە ئێران بەجێم هێشتا کرد هەرێکمە تەنها ئومیدم وایە دەفعەت ڕێژم خوایە ئەتوانم دووبارە بیبینمەوە ئەتوانم دووبارە چاوم بە ناوچایەکەی باوشی پیاکەم شەو نییە خەوی پێوە نەبینم ئەو شتانە کە ئارەزووم بوو کە لە ئێرانە نەمتوانی نیان هێشت ئیدامەی بم ئەو ئەلایەقە کە حەزەکەم ئیدامە تەحتێڵ بەمەوە زندگیەکی خۆش بۆ خۆم دروستکەم ئایندەیەکی خۆش بۆ کوڕەکەم زندگیەکی فوق العاده خۆشی بۆ دروستکەم بتوانێت ئەو شتانە کە من نەمتوانی بەدەستی بێنم لاقل ئەو بتوانێت بەدەستی بێنێت هەر شتێکە پێم خۆشە زۆر ئازادی زندگی ئەو جۆرە کە حەزەکەم ئازاد بم.
And what is your message to other women out there?
چۆن بێژم شغڵێکە مەسەلەن من دڵم پیۆ بوو ئەنجامی بەم ئەو ئەلایقە کە من نەمتوانی بڕۆن بە دوایە بگەڕێن ئەتوانن یعنی هیچ وەخت درەنگ نییە بۆ ئارەزوو گەیشتن بە ئارەزووەکانمان هیچ وەخت درەنگ نییە تەنها قسەی منەوەی کە بڕۆن بە دوای ئەلایق و زندگی خۆتانەکەی من ئایسە کە هاتم بۆ ئێرە ئازادی فقط بەوە نییە مەسان بێژم من قژم ڕوت کردا ئازادی بەوە نایێژن ئازادی بەوەی کە بچی بە دوای هەدەفەکانت هەرەوەیە واقعاً هەر وەخت هیچ وەخت درەنگ نییە بۆ گەیشتن بە ئارەزووەکانمان.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
اونجا بودم میگفتن تو ضعیفی نمیتونی ولی الان احساس میکنم من میتونم. اونجا فقط تو سری خور بودم ولی الان اینجا اینجوری نیستم میگم میتونم منم میتونم چرا نتونم. اونجا اینقدر تحقیرم کردن تو سری خور بودم هر کاری میکردم میگفتن تو نمیتونی ترسویی ولی اینجا واقعا تنهایی تونستم و میتونم به همم میرسم.
Hi, my name is Soljay.
So after watching those two videos, I would, oh, sorry, forgot to stop sharing. I would like to go around to our speakers and ask their initial thoughts, especially in relation to the panel's topic, whether they confirm or contradict migrant representation in the media and politics or in wider society. Could we please start with Zrinka Barlow?
Thank you. This is it's very powerful experience to hear. But what is equally powerful is that they're both stories of resilience and survival. And as I was listening and watching, in my mind is always that challenge: how do we make this mainstream? How do we get people who should be hearing those stories? Because I imagine that all of us on this call and people watching already people who understand, and mostly women who do this work and campaign and or have even been through this kind of experience. So one of the challenges is how do we make this available to wider public, but also how in that process we are not how do we not fall in a trap of exploitation of these experiences? Because that sometimes is a challenge when you speak to journalists. It's the real experiences tend to be contextualized into some story that is more important, and we don't get enough time. So finding ways of telling these stories in different ways. One example that comes to mind is that the Voice of Domestic Workers, they've just published a book of all the stories and experiences of domestic workers. So translating this into other formats that can make it more accessible. And another example is making illustration. We've done a little comic book of similar experience because it is really important to bring images as well into the conversation, and we cannot film these journeys, we cannot take pictures, but what we can do is actually draw them. So finding ways, and the third and I think most important point is how do we support people to be able to speak out, and that's one of the bigger challenges in movement building for me personally is that people have immediate needs of status and survival and access to advice and shelter and food, and that is a big challenge not only during pandemic but in general. So how do we make sure that we can provide people with enough safety and support that in order to be able to speak out, and some preparation, and what has happened in these both cases and what I see in my work is that people are willing to open up and speak out when there is a relationship of trust, which is in your case here. So so those are my initial thoughts as to how, but the main one is the biggest challenge. How do we get the voices to be heard in places that matter, and that is in a mainstream media as well as by politicians?
Thank you. Halala Tahiri?
Yes, I agree actually with Zrinka, that's true. This COVID-19 situation, actually, I'm sure is your next question, but I mean that at the moment it's a time of campaigning, time of movement, because people around the world, because of the globalism, that people very quickly know about everything, so they're starting to understand each other and then to show solidarity with each other. It's really important. It's a highly moment that all activists, all campaigners actually to go for one more time, shake the whole society, the whole world about that. These pictures of refugee and migrant as a disease is wrong, is misleaded, and is created by decision by powerful status that they are in trouble with their economical disaster that they created for people, and then they don't know what to do with this situation. So they must starting blaming somebody. They must starting to put it pressure on some group to silence the rest of the society. And that's the migrant and refugee people. And another picture is that I believe that because we are focusing on migrant women and children, migrant in whole is in horrible situation. But when it's coming to women, because of the man-dominated society everywhere in the world, because of especially that they are coming from the culture, that they have been treated like a second race, second sex. And then when they are coming here is not paradise. Here is still is a very because of the sex is something that women still are fighting for their equal wages, fighting for their right. Refugees are full of women, whether British or refugee, it doesn't matter, because of the abuses in the family. And then when it's coming to the communities, to the BME women, to refugee and migrant women, especially those who don't have any status, it will be harder, because it looks like that the state leave them for themselves rather than take it responsibility. It looks like that they leave it to the community, to the faith leader, to the leaders in the community to deal with the problem. It looks like that they don't accept it, those migrant women as a whole human, as a whole citizen, that they must look after that. And that is the point that we must work with, that is really important. We had cases that the police, when she went to the police, and police say that, okay, so do you have any family we can contact with? And she said that, I run from the whole family here because all of them are behind this man. That's why I am here to you help me. And then when it was a child in between, look at this logic. When is the man British and the woman is migrant and have no paperwork in Home Office, they take the child to the man, they give it to the man. Even the man is alcoholist, even the man is violent, even the man was in prison because of the violence against the women and children. Even they had a big record, but still they live with the child with father, rather than finding a proper refuge for these women with the child, that mother with child must be together. So the government must listen, the government policy must change. It's really, really important to understand this group of women who are attending to this country from very, very beginning, because otherwise it will be like these women between two countries of Europe, every time promised by the husband that I will give you a good life, then it was a hell, and then until she was up to here and searched for help. I think we needed to expand our activity, our campaign around the migrant people. I think we must change the attitude of the society that these people really needed help at the moment. I hope I manage it a little.
No, that was great. Do you have anything to add, Zorin Cabrala, or should I go on to? Okay, so you mentioned actually briefly about the situation of COVID-19 impacting migrant communities. I was wondering if you could please go into that a bit further. How is it particularly affecting migrant women in this situation, and how can we sort of create that movement that you were referring to in during this pandemic, where everything is online, where we're limited in our outreach?
Well, I think there's a bit of a myth that at the beginning of pandemic that we're all in this together. Actually, COVID-19 and pandemic and the lockdown has had a much bigger and more adverse impact on people who are already disadvantaged. And we have very quickly looked into the first and most important, which was access to healthcare. And a couple of years ago, NHS, or the government through NHS, has introduced NHS charging and effectively introduced border control into our NHS under the pretense of health tourism. But that actually has impact on people who have been here for a very long time and lived here, and for all sorts of reasons become undocumented or underdocumented. And NHS charging is institutionally racist in a way it's been implemented, and it's corrupting one of the most important public services. But in pandemic that became much harsher, and we have seen cases of people dying because they were so scared to access healthcare, even though it should be free and not checked. But NHS is also forced to exchange data with the Home Office, so people know that and they're scared. And that has pushed people even further into exploitation. My other concerns were obviously around domestic workers who live and work away from public eye in the places where they're frequently exploited and are completely isolated, and their visas are tied to their employers, so they can't leave. So that's a pure slavery, whether modern or any other, however you want to qualify that. But that is a serious problem. And they used to have one day off, which was Sunday, but in the circumstances of lockdown, they could not access that. Then there were people who were forced to work and who were exploited in unsafe and unhealthy conditions. And then we've seen so much evidence and available in public domain how COVID-19 has actually impacted and how many more people died from Black and minority ethnic background than they did from the rest of the population. And so there are a number of different ways, but all of these ways are negatively impacting people who are already affected. And then we've seen so many problems that people experience because of no recourse to public funds, which is another discriminatory measure that's been introduced a couple of years ago, and it's tied to many visa conditions. We have seen people making perilous journeys on boats because there is no other way to come here. We have seen refugees and people seeking asylum locked up in hostels with almost no access to any other support. Many of advocacy and campaigning organizations have organized support on Zoom and visiting hostels, but fascists have organized themselves even better. So they started barging into hotels in London and around the country and filming people and scaring people. So it has brought out so many different negative sort of consequences. And there is very little protection, and because people are respecting lockdown and social distancing, and they're not able to provide support in a way that we used to. So obviously with this now winter and probable another lockdown, which is already happening in many other places, things are going to get worse. So we need to be there for people. One of the things that we looked into when we did a brief evaluation amongst people that we're supporting through our casework is that more than food, more than direct support and phones and cash, people appreciated being contacted on a regular basis and supported out of isolation. And so that's one of the bigger challenges for us, that we need to provide that contact and that support. And also not allow the government and the Home Office and other enforcement authorities, which in many cases are privatized companies, to carry out breaches of law and human rights in silence. So people have organized against deportations that are happening on a regular basis. When you look at the whole system, the whole system of enforcement, it's functioning as if nothing is happening. And in many cases, it's even worse, because they can get away with doing things without watchful eye advocates. And we have also seen how government is turning up its rhetoric, and it's trying to demonize even lawyers and advocates, calling them activist lawyers, which resulted in an attempted attack on one law firm. So there are many complex problems. One of the challenges for us is to bring all of this together, because only together we can create a critical mass in our resistance. And that's a challenge, because we're all firefighting on a number of different levels and liberating time and space for us to organize together. But that's the fact of old expression of divide and rule. And we must find time and energy to organize and work together and to pool our resources and push back, because there is no tinkering with one aspect of hostile environment. We cannot achieve just one little concession. We can't even get one little concession. So we must push back against the entire structural system that is violent.
Halala Tahiri, do you have a comment?
Well, actually, I wanted to focus on domestic abuse among migrant women during the COVID-19. Overall, crime and abuses under one roof during the hard time of COVID-19 improved. Child exploitation, women's abuse against women, even crime against LGBT groups, because the COVID-19 make it a situation that both perpetrator and women and children, all of them are under one roof, and then they couldn't go out and they couldn't ask for help, and then they couldn't breathe, they couldn't share it with anybody. So it created more violence and abuse during this period. And homelessness, it was huge because if they can't stay in this hard time, they will be homeless. And then how we can manage it with the refuge. We was one of the organizations that we struggled really with this issue, that it was so many women turn to us and say that I can't breathe and I have been abused day and night and I can't live like that. And then when we search for police, for refuge, it was a huge problem, especially when it's coming to the home office, paperwork, migrant women, issue with refugee. It was even more harder for those women finding refuge. Sometimes the bureaucracy of many questioning or providing proof that accepting a person for a refuge. And then when we've got it, sometimes it was too late. So the women accepted to go back to the hell under this roof and live with the perpetrator again, because the refuge was so unpleasant, so inadequate that she couldn't bear it, because she had so many children, and she couldn't live with the alcoholic people in the refuge. And then therefore they went back to the same roof with the husband. And sometimes police next day free the perpetrator, and he came back to the house, and the women have no choice to run from the house, wherever it is. So this period actually created a very, very hard time, mentally, physically, and even caused a dangerous situation to those women. And this second period is coming, actually it's a big alert again. We must be alert. We must be prepared. We must put pressure on the government, on all decision makers, MPs, anybody who can help. We must all networks, organization, united and do some proper work, proper program, and then put it on the table on the government to help those organizations who are most connected with this particular women and children, and then they must be supported. The one that we see that in epidemic of COVID-19, first wave, everybody were surprised. Okay, we accept it. Although we didn't accept it, we tried as much as we could. But the second one, we don't accept it anymore, because there is resources, there is help, there is a refugee. They must provide it refugee. There is money, and they must help these women. That's the only solution.
Good. We have time for some questions if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. I have something that I wanted to ask Zrinka, when you mentioned about the worry of how to prevent these stories, these migrant stories, from being exploited when we're trying to get our voices heard. How would you recommend going about this? How can we unionize and organize and put these stories in the forefront without letting it fall into that trap?
I wish you had some easier questions for me.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I speak from a personal experience. When I came to this country and I was refused asylum, and I started speaking out, and it was the loneliest place in the world to be, because you're laying out all your life problems and personal issues, and I didn't really have any sense of what the impact is. I did it as a way of protecting myself. And which we've seen, especially lately, that when journalists take up the stories, cases get resolved. But to this day in my work, there is always this struggle over how to make sure that we are not exploiting people and their stories. And the only way that I have found that works for me is that to make sure that people don't only speak from their experience, but that we also speak from the movement, which means that there is a broader participation of people and ownership of what is the broader structural change that we're asking for. So that when I talk about my personal experiences, I can also then say, but I want this to change, and I want you to do A, B, C, D, and to change this, so that it not only that it's no longer happening to me, but it doesn't happen to anyone else. And there is a long journey for people to get to that place, but one person at a time if necessary. But we have always tried to make sure that in our work in Migrants Organized, that people don't feel that they're obliged to talk about it, that also that they're not obliged to say nice things about us as an organization, but that they actually start participating in organizing resistance. And so that they are part of the movement and movement belongs to them, rather than just coming, talking and going away, or sharing your experiences, but it actually, and not everyone with the experience is going to become an activist, but it is better if we activists are speaking from experience as well. And so I see it as my job to platform people in a safe way, and that is to make sure that we work as organizers together, rather than I see sometimes, and it makes me angry, in big NGOs that people are just plucked out as what they call case studies, and that really makes me sad and disappointed, because by now we should know better.
Yeah. Are there any questions for our two panelists before we move on? Looking to see if anybody's using any of the functions. No. Okay, brilliant. Well, this actually ties in very well with the second panel, and I thank both Zrinka Barlow and Halala Tahiri for speaking on this today, but you're under no obligation, but if you're more than welcome to stay behind and engage with our second panel as well, which is more so discussing the issue of domestic violence and migrant women. But before I do that, we'll take a short break because we've been at this for about an hour and a half, and I'll play some lovely music from a singer called Olcay Bayır. She's one of my favorites, plays beautifully and sings just as well. And then we'll be back in 10 minutes for our second panel and our panelists who will speak about domestic violence in migrant communities.
Hi, my name is Olcay Bayır. I'm a singer and a songwriter. Live in London. I am from Turkey, of Kurdish origin. I'd like to thank Middle Eastern Women's Society for inviting me for this event, and that I am meeting you, and I will be singing for you. My music turned its face to my heritages, my background, the melodies, or traditional melodies, the stories from a place that I came from. I grew up, the region of Mesopotamia and Anatolia. I sing different languages spoken within the region, and I arrange traditional tunes, as well as I write my words and my music, I compose. I have 2 recorded albums I released in Europe and in the world as well. You may find them in Amazon, in Spotify if you like to listen. Today I will be singing for you two songs. One of them will be an Armenian folk song called Merdan, a peasantry song, and it explains the life of peasantry. And the second one will be a Kurdish tune, one of my composition. It's called Havare. It means yelling. It's a woman's yelling on a wounded husband. A woman who lost her husband, and she expressing her deep grief in this song, and yeah, quite an emotional one. Yes, as we're going all through it, very difficult times, and we do things differently. I really hope that we go back to normal and make music, make art as we used to do, where we share it face to face and feel each other by feeling each other. And I really hope that we go back to normal really soon. But I'd like you to enjoy your event, and once again, thank you very much, Middle Eastern Women's Society, for inviting me. And I really hope to see you soon. And if you'd like to check me on social media, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Spotify. You can check me out. And be well, stay safe, and enjoy your day. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Meydani dev at goren gav le can. Meydani dev at goren gav le can. Meydani dev at goren gav le can. Meydani dev at goren gav le Tiyan yeni gıhın can le can. Tiyan yeni gıhın can le can. Haberdarek de gergin gan le can. Haberdarek de gergin gan le can. Tarindanım damhın tori le can. Tarindanım damhın torin le can. Hın sor horo imdiyari le can. Hın sor horo imdiyari le can. Le can.
Now, I would like to start the second panel, and I'd like to introduce, well, firstly, I can see them in the room right now, Nefsika Velisadu, oh, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Elizabeth Jimenez Yanes and Pragna Patel for being a part of our second panel. Again, the invitation is there for both Zrinka Bralo and Halala Tahiri to join in this discussion, but I will be asking our three main panelists the majority of the questions, and then if you'd like to say something, please, by all means, after they've finished speaking, but I'll ask you as well. So thank you for joining us. This panel's topic is about the amendment of the Domestic Violence Bill, and it looks more closer towards the issue of domestic violence within migrant communities, particularly how it pertains to migrant women. I will go around and invite each of you to speak individually for about 5 minutes or just over. I think we actually have time for a little over, about your views on the topic at hand. So could I please first invite Pragna Patel, founder of Southall Black Sisters, to speak for us today. I might have to unmute you. There we go. Sorry.
Yes. Well, first of all, can I say what a pleasure it is to be here and to be invited, and what an honor it is. I don't think I've met many of you, so I'm so delighted to be here, invited to speak to many of your supporters and colleagues, and you know, and I hope that we have as a result of this, we stay connected in the struggles ahead. Yeah, saying a few things around domestic abuse and migrant women. I suppose the first thing I should say is some of us have been dealing with this for over 30 years. It's been a long, long struggle. And I think mainly it's because when you are talking about gender-based violence, which is sort of the focus of our work, and its overlap with immigration, you hit a barrier immediately, which is the whole edifice of the immigration system itself, which, as Rinka said, is completely racialized, it's completely discriminatory. It's the whole basis of it is to exclude and it's to discriminate. So I think that the first thing is that the challenge that this poses for us when we're looking to protect migrant women with insecure status, subject to conditions like the no recourse to public funds. What does that mean? What is it? How do you begin to unravel, on the one hand, women's very real experiences of abuse and violence, and on the other hand, the whole might of the immigration system, which gets in the way of women's recovery from abuse, you know? And so that is the challenge. That has been an enormous challenge. Sometimes you succeed in reforming laws and policies and practices in the criminal justice system, in the family justice system, and everywhere. But immigration is like, it's like a wall that is so difficult to breach. And it's become more and more difficult. So we have tried for many, many years to draw attention to the kind of glaring gaps in protection for migrant women who are subject to abuse. And these are women who, as also Halale has pointed out, are denied access to refuges because of their lack of status or insecure status. They're denied access to safe alternative accommodation. They're denied access to welfare state services, to health services, you know, on the basis of their status, but also because of the condition, no recourse to public funds. And for those, I'm sure everybody knows now, but just in case there are people who don't know what that means, it's a condition that's been imposed by the government over many years, but it's a restriction upon entry to people, migrants coming in, preventing them from accessing the welfare state. It's become increasingly more difficult, and it is now definitely part of the hostile environment creation. And what it means is that if you are a migrant and you have limited leave to enter the UK, you're prevented from accessing the welfare safety net. You're prevented from accessing things like universal credit or housing benefit or some of the basic benefits. And the impact of that is that it makes it difficult then, if you are subject to abuse and you need to leave the abuse, to get any kind of support, because the first thing you need to do is deal with your homelessness. And if you cannot access housing benefits, you cannot pay for rent, whether it's in a refuge or in some other accommodation. And I think under the COVID pandemic, what we've seen is not just women with no recourse, but families with no recourse who've lost employment, who've fallen into destitution, you know, and so the whole situation for migrant women and abuse and families and destitution has been exacerbated in the context of COVID-19. And without a safety net, I think the first thing I would say is that organizations like ours struggle. We are frontline organizations. We are set up to meet the material needs of people, the most vulnerable. But what we can do is limit it because of the restrictions placed by immigration rules. And what it means is that we ourselves become desperate in how to support women when there are no alternatives. And these are women and children who remain at serious risk of abuse because the immigration rules trap women in abuse. And it's an abuse that you will see will escalate over time. and the frequency with women who come of the stories when women come to us, the frequency of accounts of domestic servitude, of being imprisoned, of being completely isolated, of being cut off from family and friends, being denied phones, being neglected in terms of medical needs and other basic needs, being malnourished, is just, it's just the pattern. So I would actually say that for migrant women in context of abuse, the forms of abuse that they face, financial, psychological, economic, emotional, is heightened. More women are likely to be imprisoned in their homes. More women are likely to face extreme forms of violence than women in other societies, in the wider society. And that increased risks and, of course, increased vulnerabilities. And we've seen women die in these situations, or women commit suicide in these situations. And I think if you want to, I mean, Zrinka was talking earlier, rightly, about how do you change these narratives? How do you change this incredible state narrative that is so difficult to breach? And I think, one of the things that I think we're going to have to show is how, under lockdown, how mental health for all people has become an issue, right? Because everybody feels confined, and that creates depression, it creates anxiety, and it leaves people feeling suffocated. Now, I think one of the things that we could be saying more, and we have been trying to, is imagine if that's a permanent condition, which it is for migrant women subject to abuse. People who are feeling suffocated, people who are feeling like they're going to go mad, because of the restrictions as a result of COVID-19. Imagine that becoming permanent, and you get some idea of what it is to be a migrant woman subject to abuse and trapped in abuse. And one of the things that a lot of the women said to us as soon as lockdown happened was, I can cope with the physical abuse, I cannot cope with the psychological abuse. It's 24/7. Because I just, whereas before I might have a bit of respite, like dropping the children off to school, or, doing a bit of shopping or going to the GP, I don't even have that anymore. So 24/7, I am under surveillance. I am under control. And it's the gaslighting that's really making it difficult. What can we do? Those were kind of queries and comments that women were making as soon as lockdown happened. So I think that, we have to kind of get home the feeling for people, what it's like to be trapped in abuse, what it's like to be made financially dependent on your perpetrator by the state itself, what it's like to have the state institutionalize the abuse and institutionalize destitution because of the way it functions. And so that is what no recourse does. So not only are migrant women prevented from reporting their abuse by these policies, but they also create a climate of impunity for perpetrators. Perpetrators know they can get away with it. They know that they can manipulate the immigration system. And if I don't like her, I get rid of her. She'll be deported. I'll get another one. They're given a license to abuse. Now, in a wider society, that would not be tolerated. But here we have these little, bubbles in which migrant women are told that you stay in them no matter what. So I think that the kind of ways in which the immigration rules combine with patriarchal control to keep women in states of fear, in states of uncertainty, in states of destitution, and in states of inequality is something that we really have been trying to highlight. And effectively, what we have in this country is a two-tier system of protection. If you are a migrant woman, you don't deserve protection. You're not going to get protection, right? Because your status is what concerns us, not the fact that you're subject to abuse or exploitation or destitution or imprisonment or re-victimization. Not worried about any of these things, because we see you first and foremost as a migrant, not as an abused woman. So that's the state's response. And I have to say that we now have going through Parliament the domestic abuse bill. Okay, this has been lauded by the government as, you know, one of these life-changing moments. Women are going to be protected now. There is going to be a framework of support for, you know, for all women. And this is a life-changing, you know, game-changing piece of legislation that's going to make a difference. But it's silent in respect of protection for migrant women. It's completely silent. And it passed on 6th July, the domestic abuse bill passed in the House of Commons. And many of us, and I know that you are, MEWSo is part of it, and so is other organization, Laws and others, we've been trying to campaign to get protections enshrined in the bill for migrant women so that they are on the same, bring them to the same level playing field that other abused women, have access to the same forms of protection and resources as other women. And despite the bill being lauded as a cross-party effort, when it came to the vote, it was along political party lines. So all our amendments around protection for migrant women was voted down by 330 Conservative MPs, compared to 207 from Labour and Lib Dem MPs who supported our amendments. That's one of the first things that teaches me, is we have a government with a massive majority, which makes it difficult to change anything, you know, and the government says and it brings out a whip and it just whips everyone into voting. I think there was cross-party concern about migrant women, and that I think we have to credit ourselves for not backing off, for shouting and shouting and shouting for all these years and, you know, not stopping, that there was cross-party concern about migrant women. There is consensus building in society generally that migrant women should be supported. But we have not just a conservative government. I'm sorry to say we have an authoritarian government. We have an authoritarian government, and it's something as women we really need to wake up to. You know, we cannot do business as usual with a conservative government of the past. Not that, you know, but, you know, there were areas where you could try and work. This is a government whose pronouncements on immigration are just abhorrent, you know, who cannot see the children crossing the channel, who cannot see, you know, the migrants who've been harassed, as Rinka was talking about, in hotels and stigmatized and, you know, and assaulted. And actually not only cannot see, but actually criminalizes them more, and then criminalizes the people who defend them, the lawyers and the activists and everybody. That's why we have an authoritarian government. It's trying to make unlawful any form of support for migrants, let alone the government said was, we're not going for amendments in the bill because we don't really have a picture of what's going on. We need to assess the needs of migrant women, which is bullshit, real bullshit, because the evidence, the copious evidence that women's organizations have presented over 18 months in the course of this bill, in oral submissions, written submissions, you know, representations, roundtable meetings, has been, you know, we have presented evidence after evidence after evidence, but they do not want to listen. They do not want to look at it. And the government instead said, we are going to organize a pilot project. And and that pilot project will help us to assess better what are the needs of migrant women. So what I want to say is that actually, if you look, the prospectus for the pilot project came out last week. And I am not joking. It is not worth the piece of paper it is written on. It is an absolute betrayal. It's a betrayal of, you know, of what It's said even its own rhetoric on domestic abuse and the need to support migrant women. So, you know, in Parliament, Victoria Atkins, the Minister for Women's Equality, stands up and says, oh yeah, we get it. We need to treat migrant women as first and foremost as victims. If you look at the prospectus, it treats migrant women first and foremost as potential illegal offenders, immigration offenders. And the criteria of that pilot project, right, at the center of the criteria, and there's lots wrong with it, including the fact that, you know, it works against the interests of smaller organizations who might want to put in a bid. The process, the time frame is very short. It doesn't provide enough resources for women. All it wants to do is support women for 3 months and then and with housing and signpost them to an immigration lawyer. No resources for counseling, no resources for other support work, no resources for advocacy work, and all the things that go with supporting abused women. Apart from all of that, which is bad enough, at the center of the pilot project, the criteria is when women come to a provider who wins the bid, and that provider, and the women cannot produce their documents, then that provider must contact immigration enforcement and check her identity. And that provider must tell the women that as a result of sharing her data, there is no guarantee that immigration enforcement will not be triggered. Now, if we think about that, Zrinka touched on the fact of data sharing and what that means. And I totally echo what she says, that what we are seeing now, we have already seen the ways in which the welfare state has become part of the surveillance state, okay? It is carrying out surveillance for the purposes of immigration enforcement. So any migrant person that goes for help is actually also checked for their immigration status and often can only access services depending on their status. But what we are now seeing is a government that is also saying that the only safe space left must also be corrupted, must now also be part of the surveillance state. And the safe space is the women's space, is the only space that we organize where women can, you know, come to us in confidence, knowing it's safe, knowing that they won't be subject to blame and judgment or even deportation, because that's not our purpose. That's not the ethos of the organizations that we run. And yet the government, with its pilot project, now wants women's organizations who may win the bid, or any organization that wins the bid, to become part of immigration enforcement. The last frontier was women's organizations. And that is, if we're not careful, they will dismantle us. They will corrupt our principles and our spaces, as Zrinka so put it. So I think, you know, we shouldn't be under any illusions. This is a major, major challenge ahead of us, because we are not just dealing with any old government. We are dealing with an authoritarian government. And if you just look at their stuff on immigration, you know, the stuff they've said around the Calais migrants, the stuff they've said elsewhere, you can see that they are not concerned with any kind of compassionate, you know, response, despite the Windrush scandal, despite the fact that Priti Patel, and can I just say to everyone here, I am another way of being a Patel, because that woman is so right-wing that it's shameful. But that woman has stood in Parliament and said, as a result of the Windrush scandal, we are going to be more compassionate. Where? Please show me where is this compassion? And, you know, and so we are under no illusions, and Parliament should be under no illusion, and it can't claim to remain ignorant anymore. And the final thing I would say is, of course, all of this is about the fact, it means that the government's entire position is wholly at odds with its own legal obligations under domestic and international human rights law, you know, including the European Convention of Human Rights, right Article 2, the right to life. Article 3, the right to be free from inhuman and degrading treatment. Article 8, the right to private and family life. You know, and Article 14, the right not to be discriminated in the enjoyment of other rights and other obligations. So, you know, it's completely at odds with its own strategies, with its own rhetoric, with its own policies, even where those policies contradict what it's doing, because it says, oh yes, we recognize immigration as a risk factor in other policies, and then go on to exacerbate and heighten those risk factors through its immigration policies. So, you know, yes, we need to push back. We need to push back against what the government's trying to do. We need to form, you know, do that. We need to resist. There is no other choice. And, you know, one of the things I just want to end by saying that one of the things that really interested me about the whole Windrush scandal, because, you know, the Windrush scandal, the appalling treatment that was meted out to those who were caught up were not immigration offenders. They were not migrants even. They were settled here. They had paid their taxes. They were settled here. They were part of this society. And so, you know, that leads me to echo what someone once said. If migrants on our border are not free, we are not free. It is a struggle that we have to wage, and we have to join the dots and also ensure that the struggle for migrant rights is also the struggle for Black lives. It's also the struggle for women. It's also the struggle for social justice. It's also the struggle for climate justice, you know, and we have to, I think one of the ways we change the narrative is we make sure that the struggle for migrant rights is also part of the framework, the wider framework of the struggle for social justice.
Thank you very much, Pragna Patel. I'd like to next ask Elizabeth Jimenez-Llanes, who's a policy and communications coordinator at Step Up Migrant Women, to speak next. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, so it's always very difficult to follow up after Pragna, because she said exactly what we are having in conversations amongst many organizations, but I think it's always very important to hear these overviews. And I think something, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and to be here, because I think this is a perfect moment to be discussing these issues. We are living a very difficult time, and as organizations led by and for migrant women and BME women, we are really facing a very difficult situation. We have been targeted, as Pragna said just now, by the government, like particularly like from the Home Office. Last week we were holding several meetings with the Home Office where we realized that, I mean, it's not that before we didn't know, but last week was so violent in terms of the presentation of the pilot project that Pragna just mentioned. The fact that the government is aiming to separate domestic violence from violence against women and create two different strategies. And I think what it's very frustrating, like in this context, is that they are not listening to us. They are pretending to do, but they don't do. So we go to these meetings, we share our concerns, we are open, as Pragna said, like we participate in good faith in this process of the pilot project. We gave evidence, we went to these meetings, they changed the agenda. We never really saw like any minutes from these meetings. We didn't really understand how this pilot project was going to put together. And at the end, what they are doing is just presenting a project that it's just focus on immigration control, and worse, they are using our names to say like, oh, we consulted to this organization. So this is like a direct attack to our services and to the women that we work with. So just to give you a short overview, I work for the Latin American Women's Rights Service. We are a feminist and human rights organization who works upholding the rights of Latin American migrant women in the UK. And since 2017, we have been leading the Step Up Migrant Women campaign. The Step Up Migrant Women campaign is a campaign that aims for the establishment of safe reporting mechanisms, so migrant women with insecure immigration status can report abuse safely. And Hal was speaking about this during her presentation. We know that the threat of deportation, it's a huge deterrent for migrant women to come forward and report the abuse. And we also know how this is used by perpetrators, how perpetrators are enabled to continue weaponizing the insecure immigration status of women to control and coerce them. And we have been campaigning and advocating for this specific issue. And we found that the domestic abuse bill was a good opportunity for us to make a change, because we know as organizations working directly with women, as migrant women ourselves, we know that this is a huge barrier for victims. And we have been leading on an amendment. There's like different amendments on migrant women that we have been presenting as a group of organizations, including Southhold Black Sisters and the End of Violence Against Women Coalition. And the amendment that we are leading from LORS seeks to end data sharing between vital public services, particularly the police, and the Home Office for Immigration Control. We are aiming that this protection and the establishment of these safe reporting mechanisms covers also witnesses, because we know that witnesses of crime and witnesses of domestic abuse are also terrified to come forward and cooperate to police investigations due to the real risk of deportation or detention. Sadly, as Pragna already mentioned, none of these amendments have been incorporated to the bill. And that means that migrant women with insecure immigration status and no access to public funds are victimized because of their immigration status, not only by perpetrators, but also by the Home Office and the government. Migrant women are continue to be excluded from protection because they are seen through the prism of their immigration status, and very worryingly, as possible immigration offenders. That's the way the government and statutory services and the police see women, not as victims, but as immigration enforcement. I think something that I can give you also a little bit of information just to kind of make the point of why it's so important to incorporate this set of protections for migrant women in terms of them being able to report the abuse safely. Last year at LORS, we published a report that it's called The Right to Be Believed. And this report documents the experiences of 50 women, more than 50 women with insecure immigration status from different organizations, part of the Step Up Migrant Women Coalition. In this report, we documented that more than half of the women, more than half feared that they would not be believed by the police because of their immigration status. We documented cases of women who never formally reported the abuse, as they were terrified by the possibility of not only detention and deportation, but as Hal mentioned before, being separated from their children or end up destitute. So just to close, because I think like seeing the testimony of the women and then having the time to discuss further the next steps and how can we organize. I think something that has been said in here that it's very important is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as organizations and frontline organizations, we have seen the damaging effects of the pandemic and how this has exacerbated already existing inequalities. And the issue is that the government hasn't established a coordinated and emergency response. And we are in the north of the country and different areas of the country, they are already facing other lockdowns. So I guess I would like just to close this idea by saying that we continue working to influence the domestic abuse bill in the House of Lords now, but we are also advocating and campaigning for the establishment of urgent measures that can really give access to women, to migrant women, particularly those with insecure immigration status, to have the possibility to access safety, support, and justice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Finally, I'd like to ask Nefsika Vesileidu, senior accredited caseworker and trainee solicitor at Wimbledon Solicitors, to speak. I will try and find you to unmute you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Perfect, thank you.
Amazing. I just want to say firstly that I've just heard such powerful and inspiring words. I'm really happy that I've been invited to participate in this. So for people who don't know me, I'm Nafsika. I am a trainee solicitor at Wimbledon Solicitors, and I specialize in asylum law, human rights, and immigration. Since I joined Wimbledon Solicitors, I have spent the past nearly 3 years coming into contact with people from all around the world who are fleeing their countries due to persecution, conflict, and war. Such a large group of these people are women who are fleeing from gender-based violence and honor-based violence. I've met migrant women who live in the UK and silently suffer from domestic abuse and violence from their partners and the family members of their partners. And as part of assisting them with their immigration matter, I've spent hours drafting their statements, detailing their plight and their suffering and everything that they've been through. These women have suffered from physical violence, from sexual abuse, from economic abuse, verbal and psychological abuse. They're threatened with their immigration status that if they don't do as they're told to do, they will be sent back, or that they'll write to the Home Office, or that they report them to the police. Domestic violence incident escalated extremely during COVID-19. These women are threatened, isolated, coerced, and controlled. I've witnessed them break down before my eyes, and I always try to remain strong for them and appropriately guide them, but it is impossible not to be affected by what I hear. These women are so strong and empowering, and I've always strived to assist them in the best way that I can. But in regards to the area of immigration, there are certain protection mechanisms in place. However, they have such a limited reach of eligibility. In very brief summary, there is the DV-ILR route that's under the immigration rules appendix for family members. So those women or those victims of domestic violence who were granted leave to enter in the UK as a spouse, civil partner, unmarried, or same-sex partner of a British citizen, or person who's settled in the UK, or someone who has refugee status or is a serving member of the British Armed Forces, and that they have suffered from domestic abuse and that their marriage has ended due to this abuse. These victims can follow this route with, of course, the ultimate purpose that they would be applying in the UK for the application of indefinite leave to remain as a victim of domestic violence. Now, this route has the help of the DDVC concession, which is a destitute domestic violence concession policy where victims can apply by email to the Home Office, providing some very basic necessary documents, and then they can be granted, if eligible, 3 months in the UK, basically curtailing their previous leave and giving them 3 months leave outside the rules that is separate from the leave they had with their partners. During those 3 months, they can access public funds, they can access universal credit and housing benefit, in effect, helping them to leave their abusive relationship and gain a safe spot in a refuge. And also by gaining universal credit or some other sort of financial support, they can be independent. They have to, before the end of these 3 months, apply for the indefinite leave to remain. And if they do so before that time ends, then the leave that they have under the DDVC continues to extend up until the Home Office makes a decision. However, what happens to the victims of domestic violence that do not hold this immigration status or that would not otherwise be eligible to apply for asylum? There is no set procedure that offers assistance to such migrant women. And this has been literally one of the hardest moments during my practice, to inform these women or these victims of this, that I cannot help them legally. I cannot help you stay. I cannot provide you with assistance. And I've always thought, how many times have these women heard that they cannot be helped just because they are on the wrong visa? The domestic abuse bill does not include the group of migrant women that have no recourse to public funds, which I find entirely irrational and just decadent, as domestic abuse is a crime predominantly suffered by women, and migrant women are women. They live in the UK and they're an especially vulnerable group. I've seen in articles and in reports different phrases for this, such as that migrant women have been overlooked or that migrant women have been missed from the bill. However, I feel that the fact that they've not been included in the bill has a sort of a punitive nature. From my experience working with migrant victims of abuse and gender-based violence, I've seen how their immigration status can be a block, and they can hinder their access to support mechanisms, to benefits, to legal aid, no matter the merits of their case. If they had another visa, they could have been helped, but because they don't, I'm sorry, we can't help you. Support to victims of domestic abuse should be given irrespective of their immigration status. Otherwise, this in effect shows that migrant women are not heard, that their suffering is not equal to others, that they are invalidated, that they basically do not matter. Without help, these women are trapped. They're forced to remain with their abusers. They're forced into destitution or homelessness. Many of these women cannot return to their home countries because their families won't accept them if they leave their husband. These women are terrified to report to the police in fear of being arrested or detained or removed from the UK. Some are overstayers, so they think that that is the only thing that can happen to them, either stay with their abusers or go in prison or being returned. They're scared to ask for help in fear that their details will be given to immigration enforcement. It's just cruel and unfair, and it's a colossal challenge. And I really think that the only way forward is for support for these victims to be state-sponsored, and it just needs to come from the government in order to effect change.
Thank you so much, Nafsika. I would like to take this time to share a video of a discussion between myself, MEWSo Senior Domestic Violence Advisor, and an anonymous client relating her experiences living with an abusive partner and the challenges she has faced with the Home Office as she fights for asylum for both herself and her newborn son. I'm sharing this, I think it fits perfectly to what has been discussed by our three speakers today, because it perfectly shows what it means to have no recourse to public funds. It is a personal account where you can hear the effects of what it means to be a migrant woman who is on the wrong visa in the UK. So I will share my screen now, and again, trigger warning, of course, that it mentions there are mentions of physical and emotional abuse, suicidal thoughts, and pregnancy, abortion conversations as well. I'm here today with Zahra Habri, our Senior Domestic Violence Advisor, and with a client whose name I will not mention for confidentiality reasons. And we're here to just have a discussion on our client's journey to the UK, what brought them here, what was the process, and any issues or challenges that came across during that process. So could I please start by asking what brought you to the UK and what made you leave?
انا جيت غير هنايا غير زياره توريست، جيت غير توريست نشوف البلاد كي دايره البلاد ونرجع في حالي. ومنين جيت لهنايا تعرفت على داك الشخص في الحانوت ديال السمك. كنت مشيت نتغدى السمك وتلاقيت مع السيد الشخص هذا، ومن في الاول كنا غير فريند، ومن بعد ولا كيتقرب ليا شويه بشويه، من بعد ولا بغى يدير معايا علاقه، ومن بعد قالك بغاني الزواج وبقى كياكل ليا في عقل ديالي. ومن بعد هو كان كيقول لي جلستي في هذا البلاد باش نتزوج بك وبغيتك وبغيت نبقى معاك وانا ثقت به. منين ثقت به كان هو السبب ديال الدمار اللي دمرت حياتي كامله. منين تعرفت عليه ومنين كنت كنبعد منه كنت كنقول له دابا حنايا راه خصنا نتزوجوا، باش لا بغيت ندير معاك شي حاجه هو كان ديما كيبغي يمارس معايا الاخر، وانا كنت كنقول له لا، كنت ديما كنتهرب، قلت له تنتزوجوا. هو غتعمل الفرصه وتزوجنا زواج اسلامي. قال لي غير يخرج لي الباسبور البريتيش ونتزوجوا زواج بريتيش. وثقت به. منين ثقت به كان كيقول لي ديما انا بغيت منك وليد ولا بنيته، وكان ديما كيكذب عليا. ومنين حملت ما بغانيش نحمل وقال لي بان الولد نطيحو، وانا ما كنش، حيت انا كنخاف ما بيني وبين اللي خلقي، ما قديش نطيح اللي في كرشي. وقال لي الا ما طيحتيش راه تعيش حياتك كلها عذاب، والا طيحتي غنعيشك في السعاده. منين ما بغيتش نطيح داكشي اللي في كرشي، انا كنت كنترجاه ديما، كنت كنطلبو كنقول له عافاك. كنتفكر داكشي كيرجع ليا ما كنمرض في حياتي. كنت كنطلبو، كنت كنقول له عافاك دير غير على وجه هادشي اللي انا ما نقدرش نحيدو، ما نقدرش. ضحكتي عليا. قال لي انا بغيتيني نبقى معاك ونعيش زعما نعيشك في حال نقولوا نعيشك في النعيم، حيديه. ما بغيتيش تحيدي انا ما غنكرك ونكر اللي في كرشك. يعني انا ماشي سقي، المهم تحيدي داكشي اللي في كرشك داكشي زعما راه حرام. قلت له كان مجوجين انا وي، قال لي لا، حتى نتزوج بالورق عادي يكون زعما على حساب البريتيش، عادي يكون حلال، ودابا خاصك تحيدي. وانا بني ما بغيتش نحيدو، تزايدنا انا وياه في الهضره، طرشني وضربني في كرشي باش يهبط لي اللي في كرشي. دابت انا وياه، قلت لي غنخرج ولا نعيط على البوليس، مهددتو بالبوليس باش فاش خرج شكل نقولوا 99% باش تبدل. كان من واحد الشخص مزيان ورجع واحد الانسان بحال اللي متوحش. كنت كنفكر شحال من مره زعما باش نمشي نحيد، حيت طرا لي المشكل، حيت بغيت نهبط للمغرب، خويا توفى وما قديتش نجلس هنايا. كنت كنفكر ما عرفتش راسي شنو غندير، راسي كان دايخ ما بين اللي في كرشي وما بين خويا اللي توفى. مكانش كنت كنقول نمشي نحيدو ونعاود نرجع للمغرب. جات لقاتني واحد البنت، كنت غادا نيت للطبيب باش نتشيكا، حيت ديك الضربه اللي كنضربني في كرشي كانت مره كتعطيني الحريق في الجنب ديالي. ومنين مشيت للطبيب، البنت اللي داتني، واحد البنت كنت عرفت عليها مغربيه، هي اللي وراتني، قالت لي راه كاينين شي جمعيات كيساعدوا البنات المتعنفات وهادشي اللي طاري لك. وقالت لي دخلي عطاتني، قالت لي دخلي لجوجل وراه غتقلبي وراه يطلعوا لك الجمعيات النساء المتعنفات. وقالت لي وحكي لهم راه غيعاونوك بزاف. هي فاش دخلت ولقيت النوامر بزاف ديال الجمعيات ومنهم النمرة ديالكم، وعيطت على واحد النمرة وعيطت وقال عليك، ومنين عيطت ما جاوبتينيش، ما جاوبتنيش النمرة ديالكم، وعيطت حامل الجمعية وحكيت ليهم القصة ديالتي وقالوا لي اوكي راه غيعاودوا يعيطوا ليا. ما عاودوش عيطوا لي حتى عيطتي لي، رجعتي عيطتي لي زهرة وعاودتك القصة ديالتي، وهي ديك فاش قلتي لي سيري خبري البوليس. انا ما قديتش نمشي نخبر البوليس، وقالوا لي البوليس غير سيري للدار راه ما غيقدرش يعاود يرجع لك، حنا غنتكلفوا. وقيلا مشاو عندو البوليس. من بعد عيطت عليك وقلت لك راه انا مشيت عند البوليس وداروا لي المحضر، وقلتي لي مزيان. ومن بعد قلتي لي باش نجي لعندك باش نعاودك القصه ديالي، نجي لعندك الاوفيس ديالك. هي فاش جيت لعندك وعاودت لك، وصراحه ساعدتيني بزاف، الله يكثر خيرك. وتما بدات فاش عاود صيفطتي لي المحاميه، فاش قالت لي ضروري خاصك ديري ريكورس باش باش يبعد منك، باش هنا كلشي كيمشي قانون، حيت لما كانش القانون ما يقدر يدير شي حاجه ولا يصيفط لك شي حد. وانا يا خفت، ولكن صراحه انا ما كنتش قاده باش نمشي للمحكمه ولا نمشي للبوليس، حيت عمري ما وصلت لهاد البوليس ولا المحكمه، عمري في حياتي ما وصلت لهم. كنت خايفة، وبالحق زعمتني حتى المحامية وزعمتني الجمعية ديالكم وزعمتني نتيا. تما فاش مشيت دارت معايا المحامية الله يكثر خيرها، ودارت لي جلسة ومشيت وجابوه حتى هو وتقابلت انا وياه، ومنين خرج الحكم قالوا لي دابا ما يقرب ليا، ما يعيط عليا، ما حتى شي حاجة.
And Zahra, what was the case like from your end? What were your experiences looking after this client, and what were the challenges that came your way?
To be honest, in terms of our resources, especially and getting non-molestation order, it was very, very effective because it was too quick. It was on the following day we managed to get the emergency non-molestation order because of the nature of the case. One very challenging thing I found, it's finding a refuge for the client. It was really, really difficult because where she was, it was not safe anymore, and it was a matter of finding an emergency place. I've tried most of the refuges and national helpline. They didn't have anything at that time. So it left us only one place that we sent her. That's, I think, the most challenging thing, because she didn't have no recourse to public fund. She was in a visiting visa. She was not married with him legally, so we couldn't do the DDV concession. So it was really, really difficult.
أنا مشيت وأنا حاملة، وما نكذبش عليك، ملي مشيت لقيت واحد نقولي دار في الخلا، ومعايا سبعة ديال البنات في البيت واحد، وأنا ديك الساعات فريمون نفسيتي محطمة، وحتى مع البنات كانوا معايا في بيت واحد، وانا كنت كنرد وما كانوا كيعيفوا من الرد ديالي، وبنات ما كنعرفوهمش، حتى اللي كنت مع داك اللي كان في الدار ودوك مالي الدار. شنو نقول لك، كان ماشي حتى تما ماشي ناس مزيانين، وكان دايرين لينا النوبة كل نهار يجمع واحد، وأنا ما رحمونيش بأنني أنا حاملة.
So that's where made me to call lots of refugees, ask for help. Please, this woman is pregnant. She cannot stay there. She has no recourse to public fund. But we applied for her asylum seeker. So we were waiting for, to get an emergency accommodation. in which, you know, that takes really a long time. It was very difficult procedure. And then I managed to find one place eventually. And they found it very difficult because they tried to contact the Home Office to give them fund as a refuge, but the procedure was very, very difficult. I mean, they had to send documents after documents after invoice, and there were no reply. Agreed that if a person is subjected to domestic violence and she's in a refuge, then the Home Office would pay for the refuge. But they made it very difficult, and that's why the client was moved to emergency accommodation provided by the Home Office, which is a hotel.
ومنين عيطت لهم صيفطوني لهداك الاوتيل. منين صيفطوني للاوتيل ما نقولكش الماكله حالتها كيعطيوني غير الرز ولا يعطونا الباستا ويعطونا داكشي المعلبات مخلط. ما نكذبش عليك، واحد الماكله حالتها كانوا كيعطيوها ليا وانا مخلطه مع رجال وعيالات نفس لوطيل. انا ما كنتش كنقدر داكشي اللي داز عليا مع الاكس ديالي، ما كنتش كنقدر نشوف حتى شي راجل. ما نكذبش عليك، مرت نفسانيا. كنت مرت الطواليت مشاركه، البيت مشارك، نعسينتي وحده ولا جوج في البيت واحد. من بعد ملي كنمشي لعندهم كنقول لهم واش كاين غير نقدرش انا ناكل هاد الماكله، واش كاين شي ماكله؟ كيقول لي حنا ماشي في الريستورون، هادشي اللي كاينين، هادشي اللي كيصيفطوا لهم اوفيس هما اللي كيصيفطوا هاد الماكله لهنا، والماكله على كلشي كتطبق. وكانوا كلشي كيرميها في الاخر. كاين اللي كان عنده الفلوس كيمشي يشري، وكاين اللي كيموت تما بالجوع. انا فريمون كنت كنموت تما بالجوع، ما كانش عندي الفلوس. ما كدوز عليك، دازت عليا الحماله ديالتي كلها، دازت عليا جحيم تما. كنت كنطلبهم شحال من مره، كنت كنشهى الماكله حتى تجرأت. كنت مشيت نطلب في الزنقه شحال من بنت باش كانت عاوناتني صراحه. كنحس براسي طحت في واحد المرحله لانني فريمون ما كنتش عمري ما تصورت هادشي اللي طرا ليا. عمري ما كنت كنتصورو في حياتي طرا ليا.
And as her advisor, how does it make you feel hearing this and during that time, just seeing how poorly she was being treated?
Oh, it's really upsetting. I mean, even myself emotionally, I was devastated, to be honest. I spent so many hours, even voluntary hours, just to, you know, be able to help her in some sort. I wanted to ask for the help of other organizations, but they said because she's under the NAS support, they cannot help her. Even I called social services because of the, you know, poor treatment of place where she is. As soon as they know she has the NAS support, they don't want to know anymore. It was really a nightmare journey. As much as we hope that when they move her, they will move her to a better place, it turns out more worse, and there is other issues, not the same issues as the previous one. I made a complaint. I mean, when she went, I made a complaint. She said that she was drinking warm water with biscuits to be able to give milk to the baby. Came in line with the pandemic, so they couldn't disperse her. I mean, usually after 6 weeks they need to disperse her, which didn't happen. And now they moved her to another place after suffering, complaining and calling and sending emails from our side as an organization. They moved her to a place now.
What are your hopes now that we've gotten to this stage? What are the things that what are the goals that you've set for yourself for the next year or so?
انا اللي درت الغلط بيدي وما بغيتش هو حتى ولدي يزيد يتحمل الغلط ديالي، حيت باه هو عنده الورق ديالو وانا ما بغيتش الولد يضيع حتى هو. كنحس براسي انا ميته غير الجسد اللي كاين، وكنعاون هذا الولد هذا باش باش ما يضيعش حتى هو. الصراحة صافي هادشي اللي كانت ما بقات عندي لا طعم للحياة لا حتى شي حاجة الصراحة.
Talking about that, we applied for the child to have a passport based on, because the father is British citizen, but she's an asylum seeker. Because of domestic violence, we couldn't manage to get any details from him. I filled in the form and got all the details and everything, even sent the non-molestation order, a letter from us as a supporting letter that this lady, she suffered this and this and this, and we're helping her. But I was shocked that the Home Office refused to give the child a passport. They have a court order saying that this lady has been suffered domestic violence. They have the name and date of birth and address of the father. They have police report. They have a letter from us as an organization. We are a charity organization, so they have to take in consideration our voice, So why they have to make it so hard for this lady? The most important thing is now the right for this child. What is his fault? Why does he need to suffer consequences of what's happened before, whether it's the mother or father's fault? Why does the child need to suffer?
And the crushing irony being that this man who clearly was abusive was given British citizenship, but the woman that he has hurt and manipulated and abused has been cast aside and is being punished for his crime. She's having to jump through rings of fire in order to create a better life for herself and for this poor innocent little boy who had absolutely no say in any of this. So before I go to our panelists, there are a few key pieces of information that I'd like to share on record, which had to be cut out when editing, or else the video would have been an hour long. But I think it's relevant to share the extent of this client's experience, along all else that was mentioned, the cramped and uncomfortable conditions of the refuge, the fact that she was made to work while pregnant to the point of fainting, and an ambulance was called because she was so unwell. The second accommodation made her sleep on the floor. She had no access to fresh food and she went hungry for the majority of her pregnancy. She had her belongings stolen when she was transitioning from the hotel supplied by the Home Office to another location when she was told that her belongings would be kept safe. Her third accommodation, which wasn't her third accommodation, had mice, had a mice infestation, and it wasn't acknowledged. Instead, her complaints were met by being told that having mice was considered normal in London. And her child now suffers from eczema, which doctors think was due to poor hygiene when she was in that last refuge. And she is unable to go back home since she had a child out of legal wedlock, and fears over an honour-related death is apparent in her case. So I wanted to move this along to our panelists. Based on this interview as well, what role should the government have played either in this situation or in other situations to prevent this from even occurring? I would like to go to Pragna first, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still absorbing the really powerful testimony, not just from the amazingly courageous user, but also your amazing frontline worker who actually demonstrates the kind of the sheer frustration and the difficulties that she faced in trying to ensure that this woman was safe and had, the support that she needed. What can the government do? Well, I think what the testimony shows is everything that the government's doing is wrong. That's the first thing. It's like every aspect of this, I don't even want to call it support because they're not offering support, but every aspect of their response is wrong. And I just want to, I think it'd be quite interesting to do a mapping thing of this, because you start off first, right, with a very manipulative abuser who's in the picture. Then you have a situation where no refuge will take her. And I think that's an indictment of refuge system. And that's not run by the government, that's run by us. It's run by women's organizations. And why and how it is that refuges refuse to take women, and that you have to run around and find one refuge that might take someone with no recourse, is really an indictment of our own, our own principles and our own services. So that's the first thing. So you have a difficulties, right? She's not able to find a refuge space, and when she does, it's cramped and difficult conditions and overcrowded. That sadly is a lack of the government not putting enough resources into ensuring that refuges are proper, appropriate, fit for purpose places that, for human beings, for recognizing the different needs and vulnerabilities that women have, being able to run a refuge where women who are pregnant have the support that they need, the resources they need, making sure that women who are disabled have the resources they need. Refuges just don't cater for different vulnerabilities. Then you have a situation where she manages to get NAS support, and it is pretty awful. I mean, all the things that you've said. So the government there is not treating her as someone who's abused, who's vulnerable, and who needs proper support. It's just throwing her in anywhere and don't give a damn. The fact that she's pregnant and needs extra nutrition and proper food and nourishment is not really their concern. The fact that social services don't see it as part of their concern, because as far as they're concerned, NAS is supporting her. And we have seen this in our day-to-day work. The amount of times when we call social services where there are children involved, because they're not interested if you're single women, but where there are children involved, we call social services. And the first thing social services will do is say to women, go and apply for asylum. Why? Because they know that NAS can then provide and they don't need to provide. So it's about displacing responsibility, getting rid of responsibility. So social services are never going to be interested where NAS support is involved. And NAS support is pittance. There's not enough money to buy proper food. The accommodation is awful. You don't know who you're sharing with. You don't know what other problems people have. So it's not necessarily a safe space. And social services will not pick up the tab, I mean, even when, and the other thing I have to mention about social services is something that Elizabeth, has said, and others, but social services share data with the Home Office. We have anecdotal information, well, more than anecdotal information about immigration officers sitting in social services offices. And you know what they do? When a migrant woman turns up who doesn't have secure status, the first thing they will do is say to her, why don't you return to your country, right? We'll pay for your tickets. Or here, speak to an immigration officer. And that immigration officer is not there to give advice, is there to make her try and return back to her country of origin without carrying out any risk assessment of risk there and risks, for her here. So social services is a whole area of challenge for us because their aim is to deter women. So where there's NAS support, they're never going to take over. So I think what we're seeing here is how at every stage, the obstacles that a woman like your user faced, at every stage that we as frontline advocates face, we have to, cajole, force, compel, threaten, write letters, turn up, threaten legal action. We have to work so hard to get what women should be getting as a matter of basic necessity. So I think, what should the government do? We need an overhaul. We need a complete overhaul of this, and I think it stems from the fact that you don't treat migrants as human beings. You're treating them as subhuman. And if you're going to treat people as subhuman, you can throw them about any which way you like. You know, you're not going to give them the dignity that they need or the security they need. You're not going to see each person as an individual. You see them as a statistic to bring down, because the government's overall aim is to bring down net migration. So, you know, for me, it is almost not so much, the question is not so much what the government can do, although of course we have to keep campaigning to get improvements, but what we can do. Because the problem is the government at the end of the day. It's setting this context.
Thank you, Pragna. Elizabeth, would you like to chime in?
Again, sorry. So I think, as Pragna said, what this case shows is a broken system, a whole broken system. At every single level, this woman was exposed to more and more violence, structural institutional violence. The second point I take from this case, as I was listening to the testimony of this woman, I remember so many cases from Lourdes, so many cases that has happened during and before the pandemic. It's like reading the same script, you know, because it's like this happening to so many women, showing how systemic this hostile environment is against survivors of domestic abuse. So we, as soon as I started to listen, like the experience of being pregnant, we had so many cases during the lockdown. We still have cases of pregnant women who have been placed in unsuitable accommodation. And we have had number of cases of women who have gone back to their perpetrators because the accommodation that they are placed into, it's so unsuitable. You spoke about the mice infestation in the accommodation. We had a case exactly like this, and she went back to her perpetrator because she said, like, I don't have any other option. And I think the next point I want to bring, and it was mentioned by Pragna, that it's so important, the role that organizations like MEWSo play in these cases, and the importance, and how in the last 10 years of austerity, it's our organizations, it's Buy and For Services, BME, who have been hit the most in the sector. And with very limited resources, we are supporting these women. Your senior caseworker said, like, I spend so much time, even like voluntary time, and we know this. Our caseworkers are going longer periods of time of their working time. They are working weekends. They are working after working hours because women are in very desperate situations, and they cannot just like leave them alone because our organizations are the only spaces, safe spaces that these women have. And I think that's why it's so valuable what Pragna said before in her first intervention. The pilot project is so damaging because they are coming for these spaces. And this case shows very well the need that these spaces, or the importance of these spaces for these women. I repeat this, like, I haven't been very long in the sector. I haven't been very long in the UK either. But I have seen so many cases of women turn away from mainstream spaces, but also women that don't feel they will be supported, so they don't go there. We have high organizations like ours, like Southall Black Sisters, like MEWSo, like Lourdes. We have high numbers of self-referrals because we have the trust of these women. These women are not gonna go to other spaces, and this is basic. So I think it's very important to connect this to the sustainability of the sector. We are so underfunded, like we are really struggling like with funding. And I remember, and it struck me so much, like during the lockdown and when funding took so long to come, because as I said before, emergency coordinated response in regards to violence against women and girls was missing for so many months in many different areas, from information, from translating assets, like all these areas, but funding particularly. There was a call from the sector to ring-fence funding for specialist Buy and For BME services, and the government didn't listen. So I think this is a very important point, and I think that's what it was very valuable from this interview that you had the caseworker there, because then you can show the struggle of the women, but also the struggle of the organization. This is costing women survivors mental health, but also our caseworkers, like the secondary, the vicarious trauma of caseworkers, both caseworkers. It's, I mean, I always said, like, to caseworkers at law, I admire so much the work that you do, because it's so frustrating being fighting a system that is excluding these women continuously, right? And I think, just to finish, this case and the other case that we see in different organizations, again, going back to the first part of my presentation, it's how women are criminalized, how women are punished just because they are migrant women. And they are not seen as survivors, and they are not supported as survivors, as this case shows. So, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Nafsika.
Yeah, just hearing everything, I just can't believe how much I agree with what I've heard, and the fact that I've also had not just one, but several clients that have gone through a similar procedure only speaks to how many other migrant women are suffering through this. I've had a client who's had a young child with mental health concerns that lived in a completely unsuitable one room, tiny one room. The only access was to a public bathroom where she could only bathe her child in the presence of other people. She had sent several emails to Migrant Help, and they had told her, it's not us you need to speak to Ready Homes or to other providers that offer a housing accommodation. When she called them, obviously there was the language barrier as well. They told her, no, it's not us, you need to call Migrant Help. She was desperate. She didn't know what to do. So I just remember receiving an email at 1 a.m., reading it and just trying to draft an email, trying to help her, trying to understand what's happening, what I can do. It's just so many women. And it is the government that should play a pivotal role. I think I've touched on this before, because if it does not come from the government, if a set procedure to help these migrant women is not dictated by the government, then such undignified realities will just continue. And the role of such organizations is so paramount up until that happens. And I do hope that it happens. It's through this effective interagency liaising that these women can be helped, through what Zahra did and through what your organization has done, and so many other organizations that we work with. And what the testimony that we've just heard is like a prime example of what happens to so many other women. And I genuinely hope that this stops, because these women, they flee from their abusive relationships to seek help, and they end up being re-victimized and re-traumatized. And yes, I've also had many clients who could not cope with the conditions that they were placed in. They did not have enough food, or they couldn't communicate, or they felt even more isolated, because at least at home, their abuser spoke their language, or at least at home, they could cook the food that they were used to, or at least they had their abuser, but they knew their abuser, that's what they said. And at least at home, they had a bed and they had some food, they had roof, they weren't cold, they could use their own bathroom. And they went back to their abuser because the government just does not help them. And that's just unfair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafsika. I would like to extend this question onto our previous panel. So Halala Tahiri, could you say a few words?
Well, actually, I wanted to second all of the good thoughts that second round speakers are adding to this situation. You can see that from this testimony that why so many, just a few of those resilient and very brave women ask for help and then go through all the problem. Many more women will live in silence because they don't want first deportation, threaten them, then such a situation that we see in this report. So therefore, they will go back to the perpetrators and live for years of mental health problem or sometimes suicide rather than going through such a hard time. And all of this is on purpose from the government because they wanted to show it that I am not helping anymore. You are not part of my society, my citizen. Go away. So that's the message. This situation that they created for those women is not written in paper, in hard copy, but it's in latent language telling every migrant, every refugee people that you are not welcome anymore. Go away. So what is our role? Our role is that actually taking all the testimony, all the cases like that to the surface of the society, to the media, to all people, to show it. And that's look our society. Do we accept it that we have it such a deep and divided society between some part of our women are living here in this country and the rest of the society? Is that what we wanted from the human rights? Many people doesn't know all situation that we are discussing here. And then push it the social media, push it the rest of the politician, decision makers, authority to answer to such a situation that we show it to them. The only way is that we shouldn't give up and we should unite it. We should solidarity, do the movement. Black Lives Matters made it a movement. Nobody can take it away forever. It's safe and it will continue. Migrant people and support them and migrant women, it should be like a movement. This 52 organization in this step up for migrant women that we all are there, it must expand to the whole country and get bigger and bigger. This is the only solution. And I hope that we are going after that. I'm sure that many other people, yes, we are in all. Thank you. It was amazing discussion. I really, tears in eyes, really.
I want to put this question forward to all our panelists. I've put you on speaker view so I can see everyone, or gallery view, sorry. If you'd like to speak, I'd ask you to raise your hand so that I can unmute you. But what would you, in your opinion, what are the next steps in creating this, sort of almost taking it out of a campaign and creating a movement? Yes, Zrenka Bravo.
I have put a link in the chat for the Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter. And it's a very grassroots, it's been written up by migrants and refugees, including women, over the last 2 years. We went through, I think, 12 different drafts. But the reason why it took such a long time is because it needs to come from us. It cannot come from somebody somewhere to write it up and then we all click yes. And the reason we put it together as a set of demands, starting with dignity, it's because people's dignity has been stripped away. And once our dignity is taken away and our humanity is taken away and we're made invisible, they can do whatever they want to us. And what I would say, this is not the failure of the system. This is the system. And the clue is in the name. It is called hostile environment. So we started with a set of demands because this is how we build a movement. We start by what we want. by shared goals. And then we have next 4 years to use democratic and legal means to make change while we're supporting people. And some of us will have a bit more time than others. But the main challenge is going to be to make the case, regardless of who's in government, that this is unacceptable. And that we connect and mobilize, because we have seen that this is first started happening with people seeking asylum who are being dispersed and then dumped around the country, and then no benefits, and then no right to work. And so there's a long list. And then it moved on to Windrush generation who were citizens. And then it moved on to European citizens, and then moved to people who married people from other countries. So there's absolutely no one who is not going to be affected. And if you think about this, there's probably around 10 million of us in the country. That is 1 in 6. Which means that over the next 6 years, we have to change, each one of us has to change the mind of 6 people around us, 6 new people. And this sounds very daunting, but that's how it's going to have to work. I did not spend any time lobbying on immigration bill. Why? Because the government has 330 majority, and they made it clear that they're not going to change anything. So we have to find other democratic and legal ways of making change. And now it can sound extremely difficult and daunting. But Pragna and I, these are our gray hairs. We have been at this for a long time, and we know that change is possible. So we can be your witnesses of how things can improve. They've never been perfect. But I was just reminded of no pass laws from the 80s and primary purpose rule. And it doesn't matter to me. We're charity. We cannot campaign on political platform, but this is political issue. And we need to work together to change the hearts and minds of all the people in this country, so that when we come to the next election, we make this unacceptable. We change the way we've been understood in this country and humanize ourselves again. And this is going to be a really difficult struggle, really difficult struggle. And it's going to be a continuous struggle. But if we make a plan, and if we organize, and if we start from today having conversations with each other and practical moves, we can build up to the point where we make it unacceptable to treat human beings in such a horrible way and take away dignity and disrespect the law and international human rights and conventions. So we need to find ways, first of all, of surviving this winter and sustaining ourselves and our mental health, and making sure that we appreciate the good work that's being done, while understanding that there is this bigger structural systemic issue that we're dealing with, and support each other. And I invite you all to get in touch with me personally and with Migrants Organize, and we'll figure it out. We've survived wars, we've survived catastrophes, women survived violence. That journey that we heard from the beginning just, gives me goosebumps, because what's driven that woman is that she's now got respect. And I want that for everyone, basic dignity and respect. And that's where the story begins, and that's where the story is going to end. And then I can retire.
We're never going to retire. But can I,
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think, I think that there is, in all the gloom and doom, we forget the pockets of resistance that is there. Zinka's talked about, her initiative. So Step Up Migrant Women's Coalition's another initiative. And there are lots of initiatives around the country. They're not talked about. The media don't like to focus on them. But, there are amazing initiatives, both within neighborhoods when people look out for each other, or, you know, those who are trying to protest against the ways in which a government wants to stop migration across the English Channel. There are, you know, protests and demonstrations there. There have been protests and demonstrations outside detention centers over the years. And there are so many ways. There have been campaigns around stopping data sharing between schools and the Home Office. There have been quite successful campaigns around families and destitution and no recourse, including taking cases to the High Court. There have been campaigning by women's organizations. And, you know, in all this doom and gloom, we shouldn't forget that there are little moments of change. There are little moments of positivity. 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a domestic violence rule. There was no such thing as the destitution domestic violence concession. That's come out of struggle. That came out of a 30-year struggle. So we're in it for the long haul. That's why we've got the white hair, because it is a long, long battle. It is not an overnight, temporary, done and dusted, check, tick off this, you know, box on the list kind of struggle. This is a political struggle. And what I would say is that every little bit, where however people contribute, is part of one struggle. And, you know, whether you run a soup kitchen in a neighborhood or whether you're involved in more direct action, it's part of this one struggle. And even around no recourse, those of us who worked around no recourse in relation to domestic abuse and women, you know, 20 years ago, when we raised issues of no recourse, everybody said, who, what are you talking about? Now you can go across the country and everybody will know what you're talking about when you say no recourse. And I think it's the power. It's the power of resistance. We haven't changed the law, but we're changing people's hearts and minds. We're getting people to understand that morally, you take a position on this. You are either going to say, absolutely, nobody should suffer destitution and indignity, or we should have these systems, hierarchical systems in our society. So I think, you know, even though we haven't got protections in the domestic abuse bill, even though, you know, there's this ridiculous and frankly chilling pilot project coming along, we will resist. We will resist. And in the course of it, we will convince a lot of people, not the government maybe, but a lot of people, that the government is not going about it the right way, that there are people that need to be included, not excluded. So I think that every space we have, we just use that and utilize that space. We join the dots, we join coalitions, we do come together. But, you know, there are lots and lots of initiatives, and we really just need to make sure that we speak about them, that we join them, that we act, and don't get depressed. You know, we never get depressed. We get angry. We don't get depressed. And that's what should drive us. And I think we can make a difference. We have made a difference. And, you know, the fact that the government is even having to think about migrant women in the domestic abuse bill is still they're having to think about it. They might be going to bed thinking, what a nuisance, what a heartache, what a headache. You know, I wish these women would go away, but we won't go away. And we can help each other and support each other and show solidarity to each other. You know, we can join whatever small or large coalition exists and really, really just continue not to remain silent, because they have silenced too many people. And so we've got to speak up for those that, you know, they're trying to silence. And I think that's the key thing.
Any final thoughts? I'm just conscious of the time. I don't want to take more of anybody else's evening. But if there's any, Elizabeth, yes, I see.
Thank you. So I think it's just very inspiring to listen to Pragna and to Srinka, like both of them with their experience, and I think something that has been vital for me, like in this process, and for many women that we work with, it's when doing this advocacy and campaigning work, it's putting at the center the voices of those with lived experience. And this is vital, and I think that's what I really take from Srinka's words and work. The fact that this charter was made out of the experiences of people resisting and living this hostile environment. So I think, as Pragna said, it's like we really need, like, this is a moment for solidarity, because we are really facing a government that is not listening, and it's attacking us. Like, the narrative against migration, against refugees is every day. It doesn't stop. Like, you go to the news and there's something new that someone says, like some new policy that it's attacking directly migrants and refugees and Black and minoritized communities. So I guess this is like very important time of solidarity. It's time to speak up, to write to your MP and tell them that really you are against like these hostile policies, to support like at very little scales. At Lords, we have a community activist group that it's very inspiring, because it's Latin American women who have empowered other women through sharing information, helping to translate information, supporting each other as friends, as community activists. And I have learned so much from them and their grassroots work. So I think this is very important at this moment. And yeah, I remember when the only amendment to went for vote for the domestic abuse bill was voted down by Tories. I'm not gonna forget, because there was a tweet from South Hall Black Sisters, and they wrote something like, okay, it's okay to feel sad for a moment, take your time, because we also need to take time to recover, because this is such a personal issue for us, right? So I remember, like, take your time to feel sad, but also recharge batteries, because this is not done. And when I read this tweet, I was like, yeah, that's so true. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna allow myself to feel a little bit sad, because we have been working on this for so long. You put a lot of work and expectations, but then they voted down. We were sad, but now we are ready and we keep fighting, and we are not gonna be stopped. So thank you for organizing this event. I think it was amazing to listen for everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, firstly for the speakers who were as inspiring and moving as the stories that we've heard today. I'm so grateful that you took time out of your Friday evenings to speak with us, to share your thoughts, to share your experiences. Halala Tahiri would like to say something.
It's just the beginning. Even it's not a beginning. We've done it so much in many years, and then with many organizations, but it's just one of the event, and so we will continue definitely, and we will help each other. We will be in touch. We will do campaigning again, as we promise all here. We will do it from small things to big things, whatever is coming to our way to help. But of course, with plan, with more people, with more direction, and so we help each other. We will be in touch again. I want to just to thank you, people behind this thing, because you know that whenever film is making, conference is making, many people behind the scene are helping. Audrey Thompson is our social media manager. She was an incredible helper for this conference. And Rose, who have never experienced of making film, made it amazing report of those interview. I'm really happy for that. And then thank you so much, especially speakers. Hopefully we will meet again in other occasion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.